The demand was not new. Trump had made it before, in his first term, in campaign speeches, in bilateral meetings, in press conferences where allied leaders sat across from him with the careful expressions of people absorbing something they had not expected to hear from the leader of the alliance they had built their national security around. Pay more. Pay your share. Pay what you owe. The language was familiar. The allies had learned to manage it, to nod, to issue statements about increased defense commitments, to announce spending reviews and procurement plans and 5-year targets that kept the relationship functional without fundamentally changing the calculation. But this time, in this scenario, something was different. This time, Carney did not nod. He did not issue a statement about increased defense commitments or announce a spending review or present a 5-year target. He made one phone call. Then he convened one meeting. Then he built something that had never existed before in the 75-year history of the Western Alliance, a $40 billion defense financing institution, fully capitalized, fully operational, and structured with quiet deliberateness so that the United States was not invited to join. This is a speculative scenario built on real defense spending data, real alliance fracture lines, and a question that NATO's founding documents never anticipated anyone needing to ask. What happens when the alliance's largest member stops being its most reliable one? What follows goes deeper than any defense policy headline. If you want analysis that explains the structure underneath the news, follow this channel and turn on notifications. Now let's go back to the moment it began. The ultimatum arrived at NATO headquarters in Brussels on a Thursday morning in the form of a formal diplomatic communiqué from the United States mission to NATO. The language was precise in the way that ultimatums written by lawyers are precise. Every word chosen to be unambiguous, every deadline specified to the day, every consequence of non-compliance described in terms that left no room for the kind of creative diplomatic interpretation that allies had historically used to manage American pressure without capitulating to it. The core demand was a 3.5% GDP defense spending commitment from all NATO members within 24 months. Not the existing 2% target that most members were still working toward. Not the 2.5% that several had recently pledged. 3.5%, a number that, for most European economies, would require either a fundamental restructuring of domestic budget priorities or a level of deficit spending that their own fiscal rules explicitly prohibited. The consequence for non-compliance was stated in a single paragraph near the end of the communiqué that diplomatic sources described as the most extraordinary sentence ever transmitted through official NATO channels. Member states that do not meet the 3.5% commitment within the specified timeline should not assume continued American participation in Article 5 collective defense obligations as automatic or unconditional. Article 5 is the heart of NATO. The clause that says an attack on one member is an attack on all. The guarantee that has underwritten European security for 75 years. The reason that countries which share borders with Russia sleep at night. The communiqué was suggesting that guarantee was now conditional on a spending number. Inside Brussels, inside London, inside Berlin and Paris and Warsaw and Ottawa, the reaction was not outrage. Outrage would have been manageable. Outrage was a response for situations where the threatening party had miscalculated and could be brought back to reason with the right combination of diplomatic pressure and face-saving language. The reaction was something quieter and more dangerous than outrage. It was the cold, focused attention of governments that had just been shown something they had long suspected but had never seen written down in an official document before. The guarantee was not guaranteed. And several of those governments, Canada among them, had already begun, quietly and without announcement, to think about what that meant for the architecture of Western security if it turned out to be true. Carney received the communiqué at 7:22 a.m. Ottawa time. He read it once. Then he called his national security advisor and said 4 words that set the next 96 hours in motion. Activate the contingency framework. The contingency framework was not a retaliation plan. It was not a counter-ultimatum or a diplomatic protest or a coalition-building exercise designed to pressure Washington into walking back the communiqué. It was something that a small team inside the Privy Council office had been quietly developing for 14 months, ever since the first signals had emerged from Washington that Article 5 conditionality was being discussed in policy circles as a legitimate instrument of alliance management. The framework was built on a single strategic insight that Carney had carried with him from his years at the Bank of England, an insight about what happens to institutions when the entity underwriting them signals that its commitment is conditional rather than absolute. The insight was this: conditional guarantees do not provide security. They provide the appearance of security until the moment they are tested, at which point they provide nothing at all. And governments that understand this do not negotiate harder for better conditional guarantees. They build alternative structures that do not depend on the conditionality. The $40 billion figure had been calculated over 14 months by a team that included defense economists, sovereign wealth fund architects, and 2 former central bank governors who understood how to capitalize a financial institution quickly, credibly, and in a way that attracted participation from governments that had strong incentives to join and equally strong incentives to do so without generating the kind of public attention that would invite American countermeasures before the structure was operational. The phone call Carney made at 9:15 a.m. after 90 minutes of internal briefings and 1 secure video call with his finance minister went to 5 people simultaneously. The leaders of the United Kingdom, Germany, France, the Netherlands, and Australia. The call lasted 22 minutes. When it ended, all 5 had agreed in principle to participate in what Carney described to them not as a replacement for NATO, but as a reinsurance mechanism, a financial institution that would fund defense procurement, infrastructure, and capability development for member states independent of American political conditions. A war bank. Without America. Capitalized at $40 billion and structured to be operational within 18 months. The design of the Democratic Defense Finance Corporation, the name chosen deliberately for its institutional neutrality, was released publicly 48 hours after Carney's initial phone calls in a joint statement signed by 6 founding member nations. The structure was elegant in the way that financial instruments designed by former central bankers tend to be elegant. Not complicated. Not clever. Just precisely engineered to do exactly what it needed to do and nothing more. Each founding member contributed an initial capital commitment proportional to GDP. Canada's contribution was $6.2 billion. The United Kingdom committed $8.1 billion. Germany contributed $9.4 billion. France matched Germany. The Netherlands and Australia together added $6.8 billion. Total founding capital, $40.5 billion. The institution was domiciled in Ottawa, a choice that was simultaneously practical and pointed. Canada was the only founding member with a functioning legal and regulatory framework that could absorb a new multilateral financial institution on a 96-hour timeline without requiring parliamentary approval for the domicile decision itself. The governance structure gave each founding member weighted voting rights based on capital contribution, with a supermajority threshold for major decisions that prevented any single member from dominating the institution, including specifically the largest contributor. The lending mandate was restricted to defense procurement, critical infrastructure hardening, and interoperability investments between member militaries. No general budget support. No sovereign debt financing. Defense only defined narrowly, audited independently. And one provision, buried in Article 14 of the founding charter, written in the careful language of institutional lawyers who understood exactly what they were doing, stated that membership in the Democratic Defense Finance Corporation was open to any democratic nation that met the governance criteria. The United States met the governance criteria. The United States had not been asked. The White House called Ottawa at 11:40 a.m. on the day the DDFC was announced publicly. Carney was in a bilateral meeting with the German Chancellor, reviewing the operational timeline for the institution's first lending facility. His chief of staff took the message. The White House called again at 2:15 p.m. Carney was on a secure call with the Australian Prime Minister, discussing the Pacific Defence Procurement Pipeline that would be the DDFC's first major project. His chief of staff took that message too. The third call came at 4:50 p.m., this time from the U.S. National Security Advisor directly to his Canadian counterpart. The message, according to diplomatic sources in this scenario, was direct. The president wanted to speak with Prime Minister Carney personally tonight. The matter was urgent. Carney's office responded in writing at 5:30 p.m. The Prime Minister appreciated the outreach. His schedule for the remainder of the week was fully committed to the DDFC founding process. His office would be in touch to arrange a call at the earliest mutually convenient opportunity. The earliest mutually convenient opportunity, as subsequently communicated through diplomatic channels, was 11 days away. 11 days during which the DDFC would complete its legal establishment, publish its founding charter, open its membership application process to qualifying democratic nations, and announce its first lending commitment, $3.4 billion to Poland for air defense infrastructure that had previously been contingent on an American procurement agreement now described in Warsaw as under review pending strategic reassessment. The White House had called 3 times in 6 hours because it had finally understood what the DDFC actually was. It was not a protest. It was not a negotiating position. It was not a bluff designed to bring Washington back to the table on better terms. It was a permanent alteration of the financial architecture of Western defense. Built in 96 hours, capitalized at $40 billion, and fully operational before the United States had decided how to respond. This is a speculative scenario. The specific institution described here does not exist. The events described have not occurred, but the alliance fracture lines are real. The defense spending tensions within NATO are real and documented in every annual NATO Secretary General's report for the past decade. The question of Article 5 conditionality has been raised in real policy discussions in real capitals and is not a fictional construct. The what if at the center of this scenario is not whether allied nations could build a defense financing institution without American participation. The legal frameworks, the capital capacity, and the institutional expertise exist across multiple allied governments right now. The what if is whether the demand that triggered it was ever modeled for what it would actually produce. Because the most dangerous ultimatum is not the one your opponent refuses. It is the one that gives your opponent the justification to build something they had already designed. And name it after democracy. Follow for the next scenario in this series. The question we examine next: what happens when Canada activates the water clause and Washington realizes it signed a treaty it never fully read?